fun, extremely ironic trivia for you. It turns out that this holiday was started by this guy. Thank you, Ron. You definitely racist president, you. But at the time of his presidency, Reagan was like the Hulk Hogan of racist dog whistling, not to be confused with the real Hulk Hogan, of course. As you probably know, dog whistling is the act of making racist statements or policies while not directly talking about a race. This is often excused after the fact by claiming colorblindness. See, this twisting of the statement that we should judge each other by the content of our character and not by the color of our skin is what's often used to promote this concept of colorblindness. Deployed in a political context, this claim of not seeing race is utilized to obscure the role of history and systems on the life outcomes of groups that have been socially and legally disadvantaged, and instead place the burden of success solely on the individual members of those groups.
So what do you as an individual black person do to change your life? And I don't think it's helpful. And in fact, I think it's actually quite hurtful to spend an enormous amount of time talking about the legacy of discrimination and racism instead of talking about what can you do right now to fix your problem.
Ah, yeah! Thanks to Black History Professor Ben Shapiro. Glad you keep showing up. Miss you. Love you. You see, not only is it not helpful to spend an enormous amount of time talking about the legacy of discrimination and racism, but it's actually quite hurtful. It's all up to the individual, apparently. What are you doing right now to fix your problem? This systemic racism against you is like forest fires, you see. Only you can prevent it. This leads to an extremely insidious false dichotomy, which is the idea that focusing on what to do to fix your problem and recognizing the systemic issues that led to the problem are somehow mutually exclusive. Hey, now, why are you griping on and on and on about who pushed you into that hole when you have all the digging out to do? Seems like maybe the thing a person who helped push you into the hole might say. Or at least someone who greatly benefited from you getting shoved in the hole. Like perhaps if someone made their living implying that it's okay to push people into holes. Now, there is nothing wrong per se with the notion of colorblindness. Colorblindness would be fine if the concept of race had never been invented in the first place. And I do mean invented, because race is not real. That is to say, it is not a biological reality, but it was invented. I'm not being abstract here. The concept of race was literally invented. The word itself had only a broad meaning until the 18th century, and it was invented for a very specific reason, namely to prevent enslaved Africans and European indentured servants from forming coalitions over their shared economic interests in opposition to the wealthy ruling class that was exploiting their labor during the early days of colonization. Not sure who the official inventor of race was, but I'm guessing he had a name like George or Andrew or Fish or Chips. So certain advantages were given to Europeans, and heavy restrictions were enforced for Africans in order to protect the rich and powerful elite. And to justify this lie, more lies were told about the essential and inherent differences between the races. This social and legal infrastructure provided privileges to individuals that belonged to the newly created social category of whiteness, and shackled, literally, individuals assigned to the made-up, constructed classification of blackness, which you can imagine severely limited the opportunities afforded to them. And so when King said, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character," he is challenging the idea that the superficial phenotypic trait denotes anything whatsoever about intrinsic worth. He is challenging the notion that there is something inherently less valuable about Black lives. One might even say, and I will, that he is saying Black lives matter. It's also worth noting that he doesn't actually use the phrase colorblind in this quote, because the problem isn't noticing that an individual has a different skin color. The problem is assigning some kind of fundamental value to this trait. Ultimately, in this speech, and with this single line from this speech, King is describing a vision of racial equality. And so, Wouldn't legitimate equality mean that you would try to make up for the unfair disadvantages that have been imposed on a community without justification? Wouldn't failing to do so just fortify that very inequality that has amassed over centuries of unjust treatment? And so the idea that the notion of equality would mean to overlook the accumulated advantages provided to one group and the degrading disadvantages inflicted on another and just say, on your marks, get set, go, without making up for the fact that one of the groups in the race has been wrongfully stuck on the starting block for centuries is, and I don't want to sound extreme here, unreasonable. But essentially, people named Ben, and other names too, I guess, are telling black people to ignore the systems that disadvantage them and limit their opportunities and simply pull themselves up by their bootstraps. This philosophy is used to prevent any disruption to the status quo, which of course has historically benefited white people. But hey, don't take my word for it.
At the very same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates in order that they could mechanize their farms. Not only that, today many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps.
Okay, Marty, that's all well and good, but what do you want to do about it, huh? Some kind of bootstraps pulling machine? Robots that create more land? Oh! Maybe the robots can also learn to pull up bootstraps and we cover all of our angles at once!
Now, when we come to Washington, in this campaign, we are coming to get our check.
Ah, that makes sense. Much better plan. So Martin Luther King 1, Ben Shapiro 0. Hey, that rhymes! You know, it's funny. It kind of sounds like MLK was talking about reparations in that clip. Weird. And some of the things he was saying kind of sound like the sort of history that conservatives are currently trying to ban from schools, and in some cases succeeding. Gee, I wonder what kind of quotes those people are invoking to accomplish such a ghoulish thing.
We're trying so hard to live up to those immortal words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who implored us to be better than we are, to judge one another based on the content of our character and not the color of our skin. And so let me be clear. Let me be clear. On day one, we will not have political agendas in the classroom, and I will ban critical race theory.
Yummy, yummy, yum. What a surprise. That was, of course, the newly inaugurated governor of Virginia, Glenn Youngkin, who ironically assumed office on MLK's actual birthday just 2 days ago on January 15th. Youngkin won the governor's race, in part, by hyping the manufactured hysteria over critical race theory. And not to be outdone, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has taken things even further and introduced, big eye roll incoming, the Stop Woke Act, allowing parents to sue over the teaching of critical race theory in schools. And how did he unveil this new bill? You guessed it, he also invoked the words of Martin Luther King.
You think about what MLK stood for. He said he didn't want people judged on the color of their skin, but on the content of their character. You listen to some of these people nowadays, they don't talk about that.
Boy, I kind of fucking hate that. The sadistic cynicism of conservatives quoting MLK to justify a ban on the supposed teaching of critical race theory in schools can't be overstated as a supervillain level hate fucking of the American soul. You know, especially considering that MLK was one of the major influences for CRT in the first place. It is the political equivalent of beating someone with their own severed arm. A brazen act of racism that every American should see right through, except, you know, America. And the appropriation application of MLK's words to push the anti-CRT agenda is not isolated to just these two behemoth stains. Once and future President Donald Trump stated, critical race theory is a Marxist doctrine that rejects the vision of Martin Luther King Jr. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy said, critical race theory goes against everything Martin Luther King has ever told us. Don't judge us by the color of our skin, and now they're embracing it. That's right, Kevin. That one sentence is everything Martin Luther King ever told us. It's their mantra. They love it. And it. They the words from every position. This one part of a single speech, always used for some variation of the idea that we shouldn't go out of our way to give anyone special treatment. Because that's what MLK wanted, they shout, internally praying that no one actually remembers the specifics of what the civil rights leader believed in, or the fact that he explicitly addressed this in the fourth and final book he wrote before he was assassinated, writing, "The white liberal must affirm that absolute justice for the Negro simply means, in the Aristotelian sense, that the Negro must have his due. There is nothing abstract about this. It is as concrete as having a good job, a good education, a decent house, and a share of power. It is, however, important to understand that giving a man his due may often mean giving him special treatment." Ah, geez, what about the content of the character and all that? How can you possibly justify giving a specific race of people special treatment? Well, he goes on to say, a society that has done something special against the Negro for hundreds of years must now do something special for him in order to equip him to compete on a just and equal basis. Do a Cody a favor. Anytime you see some reactionary ghoul quote MLK in an effort to prevent the honest teaching of our history, or the notion of equity in public policy, or the idea that we might prioritize vaccine distribution to vulnerable populations, please, politely and non-violently, shove this quote in their faces, print it out and hide it under their pillows after breaking into their homes, serve them food with it written on the plate after spitting in their food, paint it on their pets and then take their pets! They don't deserve pets! Also non-toxic paint, of course. Bombard them with this quote until they are forced to, at minimum, admit that what they really feel is this.
And yes, Martin Luther King Jr. was a mixed bag when it came to this stuff.
Because the idea that King didn't want special treatment, or for America to teach the systemic racism in this country, or wanted to encourage bootstraps pulling, or any of these other things we hear from the GOP, it is objectively a lie. And I think we've pretty much proven that here, and boy, that sure makes you wonder, what else are they lying about? What are some of the other things MLK stood for that perhaps the GOP loves to downplay? Hey, thanks for watching that clip. Here's the evergreen end plate to ask you to like and subscribe. It's any day of the year where you are.